Welcome to the Will and Dave Show, where we talk about hard things, whether it's comfortable or not. We think those conversations are necessary and important. We think that having different opinions is crucial to a healthy discourse. So saddle up, enjoy the fireside chat.
You missed it.
Well, William.
Hi, how's it going?
Week 2 with the new intro that almost worked.
We'll get there. We've got time for iteration and improvement.
Oh man, oh man, oh man. What a week.
It's been a time.
Actually, the week was good for me. It just was the last hour and a half. Has been
mad
rushed
dash
for me. I've been working, which I don't enjoy.
Oh, rough. So sorry for you.
So I have a good story for you today that has nothing to do with politics, news, anything. It has to do actually with our show sponsors. So why don't you give the show sponsor, and then I will tell the story about the show sponsor.
Which sponsor are we using?
The main one. The real one.
The main one?
Yeah.
So tonight's show is sponsored by Stitched by Susan. Stitched by Susan is I'm going to call it a up-and-coming media empire based around quilting, run by the eponymous Susan. Both her website, where she sells various quilting accoutrements, her podcast, Measure Twice, Cut Once, which is a lovely podcast, especially if you're into ASMR, storytelling, that sort of thing, and quilting for that matter. It's just a wonderfully joyous time. She's also got quite a presence on Instagram and most social media. So we recommend checking her out, as she has graciously decided to sponsor this show under no personal pressure whatsoever.
None.
None.
And she's supposed to be listening to the podcast to tell me if the audio is right, because I have no idea what it sounds like on the other end. So if you're listening, would you let us know what it sounds like in the comments? Because we're fooling around with gear here.
We're playing this fast and loose.
Right. So I was on the road today. I left this morning at 8:15. And I got home about 4:45, and I'm on my way home, and so I phoned Susan and said, "Hey, do you want me to run by Costco and get some food for supper, like a chicken or something?" And she says, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "I'm in my car, so I think so. I'm not in a stand-up bus, so yes, I'm sitting down." And I'm thinking, what can she want me to get for supper that I need to be sitting down for? So I'm going to ask you, because she's your mother. So what
for
food
supper,
would your mother not want so bad that you want to be sitting down?
Not want so bad?
Yeah. Like, what would she not like enough that you would ask me to pick it up for supper. To ask me, am I sitting down?
I don't know. It's been so long.
Sauerkraut.
Oh,
She asked me to get sauerkraut for supper, and
I actually know about that, and I
I'm
didn't
like,
put that together.
and I'm like I love sauerkraut
You're
because
wrong.
no, I'm right, and of course I picked up sauerkraut, and then I had seconds, and it was awesome.
I'm telling you about that because I was on the phone with her this afternoon, and she was talking about how she was going to have to go pick up some or she wanted to get sauerkraut for you because she was going to make corned beef sandwiches, and I was like, well, that's gross. The corned beef sounds great. The sauerkraut less so.
Oh,
I was telling her how once I actually had a Reuben that was so good that it made me overlook the sauerkraut, and then she told me how she also once had a Reuben so good it was the best she ever had despite the sauerkraut, but she's also never had another Reuben since because it had sauerkraut. So it was also the worst.
So while you're enjoying this show, we would love your support on Buy Me a Coffee. And so you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/Will and Dave Show. And for the price of one coffee, you can support the show, which we promptly will go and buy a coffee for Stitched by Susan.
Or me, because I can't stop yawning.
Or you.
We also accept emotional support if you feel the need to compliment us in the comments. That's also appreciated.
So I keep forgetting the cool part of the show, which is this.
Oh, your new little banner.
Except I have the wrong date because I came in late. It is no longer the 8th.
Gasp. Could have fooled me.
Oh, man.
January's been kind of a blur so far, so.
We're rocking and rolling on a winter wonderland, man. So what was your week like?
It was
Let's
good,
hear your
actually. I mean, it was reasonably busy. Work's kind of ramping back up, I guess. Mm-hmm. We're doing lots of maintenance stuff. So we haven't actually been building and making money per se for the company, but we're doing stuff that will help us make money in the future.
Gotcha.
Which has been good. We have a good group of guys that actually like to buckle down and work, even when it's just cleaning and maintenance. They still want to work.
There you go.
Which is a rarity.
Susan's been looking for those guys around here somewhere, and she can't find any who likes to do cleaning and maintenance.
We say cleaning, we're talking shop cleaning. So like a broom and a shop
vacuuming.
Vac.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's
cleaning
because
is relative.
Requires a broom, a dustpan, a vacuum, and some Windex and some spray stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I also completely reorganized my kitchen with the help of my significant other. That was fun. I'm not even being sarcastic. That was genuinely fun.
There's therapy for people like you. So every time I go and I do my hair, because I have hair now, every time I do, I think of you and thinking of what you said last week or the week before. I can't remember you with hair, Dad. And
I don't remember what you look like with long hair.
Well, I don't think I'll ever have long hair again, but I'll have hair.
When I think about you through the years, I can remember your different facial hair configurations, clothes that you wore at different eras throughout my life. But your hair has just always been really short. And I can't remember it otherwise. I can picture your wedding pictures in my head, and I can see your long hair and your mustache from your wedding pictures. But I don't have any personal memories myself of it.
That's
None.
funny.
Nada.
That's funny. So if you're watching this on YouTube this week, it is not the 8th of January. That is a typo, except I like the lower third, so I'm leaving it up because I forgot to change the date. So
we're going to use it. Deal with it.
We are. And it won't be in the audio. And so here's my advice. If it really bothers you, leave YouTube, head to the podcast of your choice, look for the Will and Dave Show. If you look on Spotify, you have to scroll like 14 sheets down before you find the Will and Dave Show. It's the hardest thing in the world to find on Spotify. Everywhere else it pops up. But
weird.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I've listened to us on Spotify and I didn't have an issue. Maybe the algorithm has blessed me with more Will and Dave Show in my life than I already live.
There you go. So last week we began a series on others who do things like we do, which is we look for other opinions or for for ideas which we don't agree on.
Mm-hmm.
And last week was your choice, and you had Van Jones, who is an avowed liberal.
Yeah.
In which he talks about it from, he has an argument with himself.
Yeah,
which is
more or
kind
less.
of cool. So this week we went another direction, and we got an interview with Sam Harris by your personal hero, by Ben Shapiro. See how I did that? Your hero, Ben Shapiro, who, in the interest of full disclosure, I don't really appreciate either. I like his logic. I like what he says. But after an hour of listening to Ben Shapiro, I just have to stop because it's grating on me. But
it's funny because I'm actually going to level a lot of compliments at Ben Shapiro in this episode, surprisingly enough, despite my distaste for him and his how he talks in general. I actually have a lot of good things to say about him today.
Okay, well, I'm going to begin with the intro of the show, and then we'll go from there.
Yes.
Sam Harris, thank you so much for stopping by.
Sure.
And, there are certain weird things that happen in your life where you think, I'll never end up being friends with that guy. And then you and I have ended up becoming pretty friendly, which is really kind of interesting. So Sam Harris, for those who don't know, is not only perhaps the foremost atheist philosopher on planet Earth, he's also the host of the Waking Up podcast. He's a neuroscientist and philosopher. And you should check out his podcast. It's just terrific. And all of his books are really worth the read. I disagree with them strenuously, and they're really intelligent and really fun to read. And he's not trying to hide the ball. So, right. Sam, thanks so much for stopping by.
Sure, yeah.
So let's just jump right in with the fact that you and I are now sitting together, because that in and of itself is a weird thing. What has happened in the country that we're now part of this kind of deviant conversation from the mainstream that seems to be growing in audience size?
So I grabbed that. Really got to set the stage of a pair of guys who could not be more opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Like anybody who listens to either one of these. If you listen to Sam Harris, and I've listened to a number of his podcasts, he's measured, he's low key. I've never heard him raise his voice, yell, anything of the sort.
I always think of him as dry, and not in a bad way. It's a good way.
Yeah, he just
it's a measured dryness.
Yes. Very smart, obviously, as a neuroscientist. I want to know what a neuroscientist is. Obviously, he studies the brain, but or the neurons in the brain. I would be curious because I am not one.
Studies the brain. It's kind of a broad field, but yeah, it studies the brain in general.
And he's an atheist. And on the other side, you have Ben Shapiro, who as your hero is loud, he's obnoxious, he digs, he pokes holes in what he feels are holes in your logic. He's very abrasive.
Yeah.
And apparently, and I've heard this as well in other podcasts, they actually are good friends away from.
They actually grew up about 5 minutes away from each other.
Yeah.
They grew up in the same neighborhood. I don't know if they knew it when they were younger, but as adults now, they've realized that they have very similar upbringings, at least geographically speaking.
And I found that interesting that they have these wildly opposite ideas and opinions, and yet they're good friends. And they are in a market, and this is one thing on the Will and Dave show and on others, i.e. these interviews, Ben Shapiro, is good. There is a market out there for anybody who's looking for common ground and not arguing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a growing marketplace, and I found that interesting.
It's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. Ready for clip 2, or
just about? I just wanted to touch on the one thing that Ben Shapiro kind of ended that with when he referenced them as being part of kind of a growing. What was the word he used? Not dissenting. Was it dissenting? Was that the word he used?
Do you want to hear it again?
Sure. If we can just catch the tail end of that clip again.
Sam Harris, thank you. Kind of deviant conversation from the mainstream that seems to be growing in audience size.
deviant conversation from the mainstream. And I like that.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
That was our idea for this show.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to be different from most of other shows in that we offer opposite views without the angst.
Mm-hmm. Without the vitriol.
Vitriol. Oh, there's a big word.
It's a good word.
On a clip 2.
I mean, clearly, if we want to get to a post-racial society, if we want to get to a society where human beings can simply be identified as human beings, the end game can't be taking things like race and gender and gender difference and sexual orientation immutably seriously, right? These can't be just the ineradicable variables that define a person's position on important topics for all time. You know, we're not if we get to Mars and we're still worried about skin color, right? You know, in a Martian colony, we've done something wrong. And so I think we need to reverse engineer what we think the end state should be. And clearly, identity politics is not the game we should be playing.
Agreed. And I mean, obviously, it's destroying the capacity to even have these conversations, because there's no way to have a conversation with someone who is spending the entire time assessing whether your point of view is even worth being taken seriously, as opposed to the rational nature of what you're saying. And I think that's one of the factors I think that's unifying those of us who are having these conversations. I think another factor that's unifying all of this is a belief in data. Now, I know that you obviously are a deep believer in data and science. I'm quite fond of data and science myself, although you would argue, obviously, that as a religious person, I'm not fond quite enough of data and science, and we'll get to some of that in a little bit.
So what are you laughing at? We'll see if it's the same thing I'm laughing. I'm laughing at you, but...
I don't know if you remember it. It's quote-unquote old.
Okay.
The first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. All I hear when he says, I like data and science myself, all I hear is Willem Dafoe. I'm something of a scientist myself too, Peter. It just makes me chuckle.
So I wasn't laughing at that. I was laughing at you because I saw you break into laughter, and I'm like, I didn't think it was that funny, but if William thinks it's funny, I better be laughing at him.
It's a meme, man.
Okay. It's
meme culture.
So I included that.
Did I interrupt it?
I included that as the intro for their argument on identity culture, and it's not much of an argument actually. As Sam is adamantly against the identity wars in the world today. He thinks he thinks. Well, he sort of lays out in there a little bit about the counterproductive. If we end up at Mars and we're worried about if we're gay or straight or black or white, he said we're doing something wrong. And I agree with that.
Yes.
That was a qualified yes.
It is. This is actually the portion of the entire show that stuck with me the most, because they get into some other stuff like theology and whatnot.
And we'll get into
but
that because I have a clip of that too.
Yeah. But the identity politics is the one that stuck with me. And it's because I also, believe it or not, have opinions on identity politics. And I sit so close to Sam Harris. It's like we're on opposite sides of a fence that we can't quite hop. Like, I'm right there. I'm within arm's reach of Sam Harris, and that I do think that identity politics are counterproductive, but only in so much as when we reference identity politics as an absolute, if that makes sense. So, like, if a person is if I'm talking about, let's say I'm talking about, the example that a friend used when I was talking about it is, if I'm talking about abortion, kind of the culture around identity politics would state that me talking about abortion as someone who is not female and therefore has no need and cannot get an abortion, my opinion is invalid because I do not represent the people whom it affects directly. And I think that is going to stifle conversation. That's going to stifle debate and discussion. Just because I don't belong to the demographic doesn't mean I can't have valuable thoughts on it. At the same time, I have to recognize that when I'm stating things about that subject, I am inherently missing a piece of the puzzle that I will never have. I can't have. So I can read about it. I can read about abortion. I could read about race. I could read about gender and sexuality. But you remember from Good Will Hunting, the scene when Robin Williams sits Will down in the park and he's talking about how, if I want to talk to you about art, you could probably quote me all these different artists and all the works they've done, but you don't know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
It's like that.
It's been a long time since I've watched it.
It's the concept that I can absorb the information. I can read about race and gender and different things, growing up poor, growing up black, all these things. I can read about them. I can absorb all the data in the world, but I didn't live it. I can't feel it. I can try and imitate and construct an understanding or a facsimile of the feeling. And so while I still feel like I should be allowed to have input, when I give that input, I have to recognize that I am intrinsically missing part of it. So there's a piece of that puzzle that I just don't have.
So I'd be interested in hearing his opinion, because it's been a while since I've listened to his in-depth, ideas on gender and this whole identity argument. But the largest issue I hear out of him and from Ben, and they agree on this actually, which I thought was surprising, is it shouldn't really be an issue anymore. And that is their argument, is that we're barking up the wrong tree here. Is that if we're worried about identity politics, we're about, are you gay or straight or white or black? It's a moot point anymore, and we should not be talking about it.
And largely, I agree. And I might catch some flack for this statement. At the root of it, I blame progressives who generally propagate identity politics. I generally blame them for it. I say blame, that's kind of a harsh word for it, but I think that they're at the root of it because they've made it a thing. When somebody says something that may be very hurtful and wrong and incorrect, like let's say a Donald Trump says something that is very incorrect and awful, and somebody comes out of the woodwork. Yeah. And somebody comes out of the woodwork and just says, you don't know anything about it. You can't talk about it. You're rich and white. They're not wrong. And Donald Trump may have been saying something completely wrong, but there are much better and more constructive ways to say that he's wrong than relying on saying he's white and rich.
Well, the argument, I guess, in their case, is that it has nothing to do with the fact that he is rich and white. It's because he's wrong.
Yes.
So if we look at the fact that he's wrong and just say, you're wrong, and leave off the,
yes,
you're white and rich.
And that's the
it's
thing,
still a true statement.
Yeah.
It's the qualifier that really has no bearing on the fact that he is right or wrong. And that is where I believe that they agree.
But I still think that the value of being able to say, hey, if someone says, if I'm talking to somebody of color who grew up in a rough neighborhood, they should be able to say to me, hey, Will, the things that you're saying about my upbringing or about this input that you're giving on my life, you don't understand what it was like. And
they would most likely agree with that. Because that's not identity politics.
Well, yes. And that's the thing, is that we've taken that conversation between me and a person that's generally healthy, them saying, hey, Will, you're not going to be able to understand this topic in a way that I do because you didn't live it and feel it. And we've just blown that out of proportion to being, it's just an easy way to discount someone else's opinion. It saves you the effort of having to actually take on their idea for what it is, whether it's stupid and obscene and hurtful or not. And we just say, is racist or is classist, and walk away from it, thinking that we've done something good or somehow trounced them. And that's not the case. And now
even more so in this instance, it was this argument that if you are white, you have no voice.
Yeah.
In the racial argument. Or if you are rich, you have no voice and you are not able to have a voice. And that is where we agree probably is that is not right either.
Exactly. So. It's only a Sith deals in absolutes. Like, there is no absolute. Yes, me as a middle class-ish white person, I am missing pieces of the puzzle. There are things about an upbringing of someone who lived in low-income housing in the city that I just will never fully comprehend or understand. But that doesn't mean I can't have an opinion. It just means that I need to be more careful and tactful and considerate with my opinion because of that.
Let's move on to clip number 3. I have 4, so this will be next to last.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the kind of root issues that I think people want us to get into, which is going to be all the religion versus atheism and rationality and all the deep stuff that is actually more fun to talk about than politics, in my view.
Yeah.
And I get the pleasure of talking about it with you here because I don't usually have the pleasure of talking about it on a daily basis when I'm covering politics.
Yeah.
So since we get to do this, let's do it. So let's talk about where you think morality comes from. So in the religious view, obviously, there are certain things that I believe are capable of understanding by any sentient human being. So I don't believe that all human beings in the absence of religion are immoral people who go around murdering their neighbors and raping their sisters. I think that, and in fact, this is pretty well embedded in even Judaic philosophy, the idea that there is a sort of natural law theology where you as just a normal person know not to kill people and know not to steal and know to set up courts of law. This is what they call the seven commandments to Noah. But the idea is that anyone can basically discover these things. And there are universals across culture about you're not supposed to murder your brother. But the biblical reading is that to reach a more sophisticated level of morality that leads to a sort of right-based society we see here, you at least need the catalyzing enzyme of a Judeo-Christian religion in order to get here. That would, I think, be the most rationalistic argument on behalf of Judeo-Christian values.
But where is here again?
Here would be a civilization that values individual rights above the values of the collective, that says that people are to be treated, to use the biblical phrase, as made in the image of God, that we should treat individuals as made in the image of God. That does not happen in the absence of a Judeo-Christian value system. That's the religious argument. Although
that is more of a historical argument.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's a rationalistic argument because the deeply religious argument would be God said so do it, right? But that's not the argument that I think is the most compelling because that only works if you believe in God and if you believe in revelation. So that's not the argument that I tend to make because I don't find it intellectually convincing. It's an argument from authority, which of course is not particularly convincing. So I tend to make the historical argument, which is that history brought us to that the reason we are at this point in history is because without that particular catalyzing enzyme, you don't get what you have here, which is why the West and Western civilization crop up in a Judeo-Christian system, but don't crop up in, for example, Islamic countries, and Islam's been around for 1,000 years. So number one, what do you make of that argument? And then I want to get into where you think morality comes from.
It was interesting in that, and I left it there. There's a lot more in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how to explain this. Is he asked a question there at the end, and he left it for 15 minutes while, the exposition of Sam Harris on why the Bible is wrong and biblical morality was laid out, and he never said a word in argument.
Yep.
He never argued with him. He never said, "Oh, you're wrong, Sam." There are areas where they differ, yes, but there's an argument of huge importance for each of them. You have a guy who Ben Harris, this is his faith. It's the fabric of his being, of his existence in his heart. And you have a guy in Sam Harris who says, it doesn't really mean anything based on nothing. And they can have a conversation for an hour with no hard feelings, and they honestly admire each other's position and, again, the reason for their position, even though they don't agree. And that's so important for us as a life lesson.
It's strange for me because most of my exposure to Ben Shapiro, because I admittedly largely avoid him, because outside of needing to research things for specific topics, I'll never go out of my way to watch or listen to Ben Shapiro. And so the end result is that most of what I see in here is slipped in places. So it's short form media, clips, sound bites, blurbs, etc. And this is the first time I've sat down and truly listened to him over an extended period of time. And more specifically, first time I've listened to him talk to somebody that he very clearly views as his equal or peer. And the change in his countenance is dramatic. I mean, he still talks fast. He's still Ben Shapiro. But
Yeah.
he is open to being corrected. When Sam corrects it as being a historical argument, he's like, oh, yeah, sorry. Like, he realizes that he was a misnomer. And he treats them completely differently. And part of that, I think, is a reflection on just how polite and insightful Ben Shapiro can be. The uglier side of that reflection is it shows how little respect he has for many of the other people that he talks to in universities and things like that, that he is so okay with talking down to them in the way that he tends to do. But that doesn't take away from the fact that when he is talking with somebody on a serious topic and who he views as a very serious and gifted intellect, he treats them as such, and he does it genuinely. I think. I don't think he's sucking up to Sam Harris. I think he genuinely respects him.
Let me ask you this: is this maybe because of those who argue with him on university campuses, and then, there's a million of those arguments around in the clips in which he rips holes in people, almost literally. Mm-hmm. Is it because they are not his intellectual equals, and they act as though they are, and he has no patience for them?
Well, just like with a Louder with Crowder doing XYZ convince me otherwise things that he used to do. It's an imbalance of there's a gross imbalance of power in those in that format, because a person who walks up to a microphone at a university, they get, say, 30 seconds to ask a question.
Right.
Ben Shapiro then has as long as he basically wants to come at it from every angle that he wants, and they're not going to get the chance to defend it. There's no back and forth. That's not a debate.
I wouldn't say none. I've heard a few of them, and he does allow, just usually, and you have to agree with me on this one, I believe, is that most of the kids who go at him at universities are just not that bright, and they bring these arguments that just are not valid, and his whole job his whole role is to poke holes in those arguments as they're not valid.
Sort of. His role as an icon, in the sense that he is kind of a conservative icon, is to poke holes in it and to make good clips. His role as an intellectual and a person who, I'm assuming you're going to, I would like to assume he's going to a university to help educate, not to crap on. Well, it's the way in which he says things. In these clips. Like I'm using these kind of these clips, which are the worst of the worst. Yeah, they're obviously the outliers. They're the worst of the clips because they're the ones that go viral. How do I word this? He seems to treat the conversations and the ideas presented not as something that he can educate them on how they're incorrect or how that line of thinking is incorrect. Right. But rather as a way to put them down, as a way to denigrate them over their comment. As if I come up and I ask a stupid question because I don't have the knowledge to know better, and you look at me like, no, that's stupid. Here's why it's stupid, and you're stupid too for thinking it. Or if you're like, hey, this information over here invalidates the information that you're talking about, so maybe go take a look at this information and it'll take you to some better places, which is going to, both of them are proving the other person wrong. But which one do you think is going to leave me in a position of wanting to find out more?
I think it's because, at least in the case of Ben Shapiro, and I don't know him, obviously, so I don't. Yeah. Just in looking at the roles he plays, and I do believe for him it's a role. Mm-hmm. As it works, it sells. I mean, it's how he makes a living, right?
Yeah. So as much as anything, I think it is a performance.
It also is because of the fact that in the university, he is arguing, it is not only with the student who often has an agenda as well, and you've heard that in their questions.
Everyone has an agenda.
But it also, I feel he's arguing with the system, with the educational, and the professor, and the kid. So it isn't only with the kid who says, hey, isn't it okay, if I can be gay, or that's a bad example of anything that he argues with, if it be politics or whatnot. Isn't this okay? And he's going to look at him and say, no, it's not okay, and here's why. And he beats them down with logic sometimes.
Not always logic.
I did say some. I added the qualifier before you jumped in.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's because he sees a system in which nobody's arguing with the kid. They just are patting him on the back saying it's okay to feel that way. And he's saying, no, it's not. His whole line early on was, the facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah.
And that's true. And I think he carries it maybe a little bit overboard. And your observation in this interview that he doesn't is because he sees Sam make sense.
Yeah. And
he doesn't have to hit him over the head as just.
I feel like his hitting people over the head, while possibly acceptable in a vacuum, it's adding to driving a wedge between ideological groups. And admittedly, yes, I do have a certain level of sympathy for someone like him who has basically been shoehorned. I'm sure he got rich out of it, so it's not like it's punishment or something, but he's shoehorned into this position where for quite a few years he was expected to do that.
Yes.
People showed up to watch him rip people apart, and people showed up because they were hurt that people that they cared about were getting ripped apart by him. And so they would inevitably come up there with vitriolic questions and statements about him and who he is, which, if you do that day in, day out for a living, touring around the country, going to universities and having 1 out of every 5 students basically call you a bigoted asshole, you're going to get a little bit bitter over it.
Yeah.
And I definitely have sympathy for that. So I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that Ben Shapiro is really nice in this interview, and that just makes me wonder why it's so sus that he's not nice in other interviews. I want to say that it is incredibly pleasant to hear him be like this in this interview. And I can say I genuinely enjoyed listening to him in this podcast, and Sam Harris. Like, I enjoyed the conversation, despite my misgivings about Ben Shapiro. And I hope that he does more stuff like this. I feel like that the ideas that he has that do hold water and do carry a lot of value will come across a lot better and reach a lot more people if he can continue to do it in a more palatable format like this.
Okay. Here's the ending clip.
Okay.
So for me, reason is the only thing that, again, as we talked about at the top of this, it's the only thing that takes us out of who we are and scales to some universal point of view. You're not reasoning. If you're actually reasoning, what you're arriving at is not just true for you, it's true for anyone who could be it's true from essentially above on any given topic. It does offer the view from above or the view from any possible perspective, or at least it takes into account the effect of perspective. So it's like if again, reason is and scientific rationality generally is the thing that explains why, if you're colorblind, you don't see colors the way I do, right? And that's it. But it's not that we can't get at what's actually real. We can, because we can explain divergences of opinion. And otherwise you just have those divergences.
Well, we are definitely going to have you back for a much longer conversation. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
For folks who don't know Sam's podcast, I'm sure you do. It's Waking Up. Sam's podcast is the Waking Up podcast, and his most recent book is Waking Up.
Yep.
So check that out. Sam, thanks so much for stopping by. Really, it's a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
So I just liked how he ended that.
Mm-hmm.
He ended the conversation and he gave him the last word, which is in the face of what Ben Shapiro believes.
Yeah.
And he ended with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's his show. He had every right to end it on his counter argument, and he didn't. And I find that heartening in a person with his audience who is looking at Ben Shapiro to argue him with facts and all the nonsense. And he said, you have the last word, and here is your podcast and your book. And that's how it ends.
Friendly plug.
Yeah. And I look at that and I think, what can we learn as humans in dealing with those who we don't agree with if we give them the last word.
Yeah.
And walk away. Yeah.
For those of you who are listening to this as a show, this won't really stand out. But to those of you who are watching and saw the clips, both of these gentlemen in this podcast are exemplars of how people should listen to other people. I'm terrible at it. I am terrible at listening. I have a habit of listening to respond, not listening to hear. Or you could flip it around, hearing to respond and not hearing to listen.
Yes.
Both of those guys, when they would hand over the metaphorical microphone to the other one, they sat there, eye contact, and just silently absorbed everything that was coming out of the other person. And they looked like they're just sitting there, just calmly and excitedly even chewing on it, mentally speaking. And that was wonderful to see.
Yes.
That was so wonderful. I feel it's something that I personally have to work on, both in terms of debating socio-political topics with people, but even just in my personal life, learning to hear more graciously and more attentively is a skill that I think everyone could do with.
And I would agree. This whole idea of how to listen and not have to respond is so foreign to people today. I played a clip of our show last week for a friend of mine, and he heard the line of Van Jones about if who you listen to every week. Is it Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or whoever the other one was? And the only thing my friend got out of it, he said, well, he's all wrong about Fox News. All the people on Fox News are liberals now anyways. And I said, you missed the point. It's not about Fox News. It's about, are you listening to right or left, or are you acknowledging that either
perspective
side has a viewpoint? And the first thing he did was, he's all wrong about Fox News. Well, that was completely missing the point.
I would even say that's the antithesis of the point.
Yes.
That's exactly what he's talking against.
He's making the point that Van Jones was making in the clip, and that we've been making for a year and a bit.
We didn't have a clip of it, but Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro did touch on this. Why long form discussions like their hour-long podcast and our podcast that can go for around an hour are so valuable is because we don't have to condense an idea into snippets like a Fox News or a CNN or any mainstream media, whether it's an article or interviews. Usually they don't have the time. They have to try and cram so much news into any given day because so much happens in any given day that they can't actually stop and walk around a topic, take a look at the backside of it, take a look at the north face and the south face and really get a feel for it, and then dissect it with their peers. They have to try and pump out an opinion piece stat in seconds. When you only have 45 seconds to state your business about something, you will inevitably misstep.
Well, and they usually are doing it with an agenda. So he'll say more, and they'll edit it down so it fits their viewpoint as well.
Absolutely.
It also is one of the arguments actually for the popularity of Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
It just isn't that he's always right. It's the fact that in 3 hours he can allow whoever is on the other side of the table from him an opportunity to say his whole piece.
Yeah. I think it's why people who listen to Joe Rogan get less upset than people who read about Joe Rogan.
Yes.
Is because you can even use our podcast as an example. How many times have we talked about a subject and at the beginning of an episode we're going to have some strong feelings about this, or we'll get heated at the beginning, but by the end of an episode, inevitably we have found some level of equilibrium and some common ground there. And it's not
true.
Just that there's common ground, it's that we can take time. We can flesh it out, and we can say things. We can be messy. We can say things that are a little bit harsher and more aggressive than what we need to be, and then we can dial it back as we get along.
Yeah,
we can sift it down and prune it a little bit.
Prune it. I like that verb. Well, William, we will have another one of these for next week, and I don't know who it is yet. We're taking it a week at a time, folks.
I have some ideas.
I have some ideas as well. So after the show, we will come up with an idea together and we'll have it ready for next week.
Sounds good.
So for those of you who enjoyed all the voices of William,
Mm-hmm.
we will be closing the audio only version of the podcast with all those voices. So if you want to hear more of them, head over to the podcast app of your choice and they will be there in all their glory.
Sweet, sweet splendor.
The Frenchman, 70s Beatles.
Good Lord. Still not super proud of that one, but you seem to enjoy it, and that's all that really matters.
Mrs. Doubtfire's there.
That
the whole
one I'm proud
crowd of the many identities of William.
Yes, the many fractured pieces of my psyche.
That's right. So wherever podcasts are found, I think I counted the other day, we're on like 140 different platforms. So
yeah, if you listen
should
to
be able
podcasts,
find
you can probably find us.
And there is no other show with the name The Will and Dave Show. So you should be able to find us at some point.
Speaking of, I did look us up on Spotify during the show.
Yes.
If you just search The Will and Dave Show, and it has like all the podcasts or episodes or top results and songs,
Yes.
you won't find us there. But if it says podcast, you just hit see all. We are the first one.
Oh,
The
are
Will
we?
and Dave Show. We are number one because it
Sweet.
matches. If you search The Will and Dave Show, we will be at the top as long as you look at the list of all podcasts with that title. So
We're
2
number
clicks
one in
instead of
somebody's
one.
list.
I mean, I picked the name so that it was or we picked the name so it'd be as
Yes.
specific as possible
Yes.
and hard to misconstrue.
I was very surprised when we were planning all this, a year and a half ago. We were looking at it, thinking there has to be a Will and Dave Show somewhere, and there wasn't.
Nope.
Like we
That
got
was-
the
that was the
domain,
final nail
we
in the
got
coffin
the
for picking it.
socials, we got everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of cool. Okay, well, William, do you have any words of wisdom for our viewers?
Certainly do. Stay safe, don't die, and have a good night, folks.